Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Book Review Blog. I am your book reviewer, and today we're going to review the book Desperation by Stephen King. It takes place in Nevada, and it was written in about 1996. And it starts off with Peter and Mary Jackson driving on Highway 50, which is nicknamed the loneliest highway in the United States. And you're going to see kind of why, because there's nothing out there. There's just desert and things like that. And they're driving, and all of a sudden they get pulled over by a police officer. And they're like, why are they stopped? Why are we stopping? We're not speeding or anything like that. And the first thing that they notice about this police officer is he's very big. He's just very gargantuan and very tall. And he does the normal thing, need your license, registration, blah, blah, blah. And eventually he tells them that their license plate on the back of their car is gone. And then tells them, okay, just move the license plate from the front to the back. And so they say, okay. And while they're in their trunk getting the toolkit kit to do that, the cop notices a bag of marijuana on their car, and Peter and Mary are pleading with them, like, this is not our car. This is our sister. This is my sister's car, which proves on the registration. This marijuana isn't ours, it's hers. And of course the cop doesn't believe them and takes them into custody and drives them to his police station, which is in Desperation, Nevada, hence the part of the reason for the title. And when a kind of fun thing is when he's in the car with them, he's reading them their Miranda rights. And it's like, you have the right to remain silent, and if you choose to give up this right, anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. I'm going to kill you. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you, type of thing. And the point was that he's put in, I'm going to kill you, into the Miranda rights, which was, they're realizing, oh my gosh, we're dealing with a crazy man. But he takes them to the police station, and when they get to the entrance, one of the first things that they realize or notice is that on the stairs that go upstairs to the holding cells, there's a little girl that's lying on the stairs, and she's obviously dead. And the policeman, whose name is Collie and Trajan, kind of brushes it off and is like, oh, forgot about her. And there's some sort of verbal thing downstairs where Collie all of a sudden gets angry, pulls out his gun, and shoots Peter in the gut, and so therefore Peter is dead, and Mary is screaming and very scared. But Collie doesn't kill her. He takes her upstairs to the holding cells and puts her in a cell. And also in other cells is an older man whose name is Tom Billingsley, and a family that are named the Carvers, and it's a mom and dad and a young boy. And the dad's name is Ralph Carver, the mom's name is Ellen Carver, and the boy's name is David Carver. And you kind of learn later on that the little girl that was on the stairs, it was their daughter Kirsten Carver. She's also named Pie, or that's a nickname that David kind of gave her. And they tell Mary their story of how they were driving on Highway 50 in a Winnebago, I believe to Lake Tahoe, and they hit like a patch of nails or spikes where all their tires blew out. And they get pulled over by Collie and Trajan, and at first he's very nice and like, oh, I see you got some trouble, I'll help you. I'll drive you to the police station and where you can call for help. And so initially they're like, okay, but then when they're in the car with them, he gets, again, kind of nuts, like for Peter and Mary, and then he gets kind of rude and mean. And so now they're realizing again that they're dealing with somebody who's kind of crazy. So they don't exactly tell you how Kirsten died, or how, eventually you kind of learn that she was pushed down the stairs, but you don't know what happened before that. But anyway, that's how they ended up there. And Tom's story we'll get to a little later, but and then it kind of jumps back to Highway 50, where you meet another character named John Edward Marinville, and he's an author on the road to doing a cross country tour, kind of accompanied by his partner Steve Ames. He's just kind of going. He's kind of a wash up writer, but he's trying to energize his career, where he's doing essays from across the United States. And he gets pulled over by Collie, and at first Collie is very nice, and he recognizes John Edward Marinville for, being an author, and he's like, oh, I always loved your books, I love this book, and so, they kind of talk about that type of thing. And then Collie notices that John's backpack or bag on his motorcycle, it was loose, and he helps him do it or fix it, and then Collie kind of notices a bag of marijuana, and it just kind of happens that it's the same bag that Collie plucked from Peter and Mary's car. So obviously that Collie put it there, and John, says, oh, you put it there, I don't smoke myself. And it's like, oh, no, you're a writer, blah, blah, blah. Everybody smokes. And so but he's more violent with John. Like, they get into a physical struggle. And while he puts John in the car and then goes and tries to hide his motorcycle. And while Collie is busy hiding his motorcycle, he tries to call Steve Ames on his cell phone, and Steve is in like a rider van, but like 100 or so miles behind Johnny. He's carrying his equipment. He's kind of a roadie, I guess, if you want to call it that. And Steve has picked up a hitchhiker named Cynthia Smith, and so she's in the car with him, and Steve and Johnny are trying to have a conversation, but because they're out in the middle of the desert, the reception is bad, and so he only gets bits and pieces of it. Like, I'm caught in the desert by a cop, Winnebago, because he sees the Carver's Winnebago off to the side of the road, and but then Collie takes him into the police station, and he becomes another captive in the holding cell. And eventually Steve and Cynthia do see the Winnebago, and they do find his motorcycle, and so they're like, oh, something has happened to him, but they weren't sure what, because he may have said cop, but he didn't say that I'm being held by one. So they're like, oh, we have to find the policeman, because they think that Johnny has been, like, hurt or killed and is taken off somewhere by, who knows who. But, in one of the things that Johnny realizes about Collie is that he does not look well. He's bleeding from kind of, like, orifices, like nose and mouth, and things like that. So he's, at first he's like, dude, are you okay? And Collie's like, don't mess with me, don't talk to me, I'm fine, blah, blah. And so when he's in the holding cells, he tells all the people there that he notices that he's not well. And what happens is that Collie ends up taking Ellen Carver with him, and he's like, I'm just gonna, take her with me, blah, 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 and, you don't know where they're going. And then you hear a little bit of Tom Billingsley's story, where he was a resident of Desperation, and he Kali just kind of grabbed him and took him in. And one of the things that also they notice is that there's nobody in this town. Like, it's a ghost town, basically. And Tom explains why, and that everybody in this town is dead and has been killed by Kali. And now, again, further reason that they're, dealing with the psycho. And so David is a Christian, and he's kind of a born again Christian, I guess, because he had an issue with his friend Brian back home in Ohio is where they're from, and his friend Brian was hit by a car while riding his bike, and he really sustained a head injury, and I believe Brian's doctors and parents had said that he had died, or he was going to die, but David prayed really hard to God, saying, if you help my friend Brian, I will do something for you. And bargaining with God, obviously. And so God helps Brian recover, and Brian makes a full recovery. And so now David has been praying very frequently and reading the Bible and things like that. So he prays often to God in his holding cell, and he receives a vision from God, kind of using his sister Pi's spirit, and where he takes soap from the sink in his holding cell and soaps himself up to make him almost be able to get through the bars of the holding cells. And he makes it, and he's able to free the other people. And so, but while before he frees them, he's kind of goes along in all the holding cell, or all of the other rooms of this police station, and notices that there are a lot of dead people. Unfortunately, if you don't like dead people, or if you don't like blood and things, this book is not for you, because there's a ton of them. But he frees everybody from their cells, and they go out and try to figure out what's going on, and they're always afraid that Kali will make a reappearance. And eventually they go to a movie theater and kind of hold up there, because Tom's like, that's kind of where I was living before, and it's it's deserted, nobody goes there anymore. And then you go back, because while they're doing this, it flips back and forth to their situation and Steve and Cynthia's. And Steve and Cynthia end up in desperation looking for the police station, and they come across this thing called the Desperation Mining Company, and they notice a big mining pit, and Tom talks about that a little bit as well, where their Desperation used to be a mining facility in like the late 1800s, and they used to employ Chinese people to work the mines, and in the late 1800s they had dug way too far down and had created a collapse, but then it was collapsed and not in use until very recently before this, where they started to dig it up again. And when they had started to dig it up again, they kind of noticed that things had really changed. And that's where they kind of said, oh, this is where Kali kind of got nuts and kind of started to kill people. And so they thought, okay, there must be something wrong with this pit. They called it the China pit, because, again, that's where all of the, when it caved in, all of the Chinese people that were working there died. And so, and one of the when Steve and Cynthia are driving along, they also run into another woman named Andrea Weiler, and Andrea was working for the China pit, or the Desperation Mining Company, trying to redig it up. And at first she's like, I'm really really glad to see you. I haven't seen anybody in days. Everybody's dead. And things like that. But then, and they eventually reconnect and regroup with everybody. and they're at this movie theater, and when they're there, Kali notices, or Kali, um, there's a spirit in Kali that is taken over, that has taken over his body, and this spirit is called Tak, and this Tak leaves Kali and enters through Ellen, which is why Ellen was taken, because the reason why Kali was bleeding out was because the body was done with him and needed another kind of source, or host to live in, and so it took Ellen, and so, and everybody who was in the movie theater was afraid that Kali was gonna come, or whoever was gonna come back, and so they had guards at along, and one of the things that they did, or one of the things that this Tak thing does, is it can control the animals, and this Tak creature kind of controlled the mind of a cougar when they said, find out where these people are and kill them. And so this cougar finds the movie theater and gets in somehow, and eventually kills Tom Billingsley. And then while Tom is bleeding, because she doesn't like kill him, she kind of like really injures him where he eventually bleeds out. But before the cougar is killed by the other people, or afterwards, Mary is there with Tom, kind of helping him out, or trying to get him in whatever shape he can. And Mary hears the voice of Ellen coming from outside, and Ellen's like, Mary, help me, and that was a ruse to get Mary alone. And so Ellen grabs Mary and takes her with her, and you're not known where they go at that moment, but and then they realize that, or the group kind of realizes that Andrea Weiler, I believe is what I said her name was, that she's kind of getting a little more crazy, and she really focuses on David, and they realize that this Tak hasn't kind of taken over Andrea, but it's kind of a part of Tak has taken over, because she tells them more about what happened in the Desperation Mining Company, because she works there. And what happened was this Tak spirit was dug up eventually, or originally in the 1850s by the Chinese men, but because of the cave-in, it was taken away. It was kind of sealed up, and then recently, when it was started to be dug up again, it opened up and entered into two people, two workers of the mining company, and that's how kind of they started to kill people, and eventually they found Kali and killed him, and that's how Kali became affected by this Tak. And so but Andrea finds David, and tries to kill him, because Tak is telling Andrea that he needs to kill David, because David he calls him a pray boy, because he likes prayer, and that he's in it with God, because Tak is kind of like the devil type thing, and but eventually that they get her away from him, and I think they eventually kill her, and but David is, while he's praying, he's getting voices from God telling him that they need to go back to the Desperation Mining Company and try and kill Tak themselves, and which is against what everybody else is saying, because everybody's like, we need to get out of here, screw everybody else, and David's like, no, we need to go help Mary, because Mary's still alive. Tak hasn't gotten her yet. And so eventually they go, to the Desperation Mining Company where Mary is being held captive, and eventually she breaks out of whatever of the kind of the house that she's in and reconnects with them, and they end up beating this tack, and Johnny ends up kind of taking over and destroying it himself and sacrificing himself for this. And while they're there, also Ralph dies. So now David is an orphan with like nobody, and I was kind of curious to know what kind of happened to him, because you never know what ended up happening. Does he go live with relatives? Does he go live with the people in his group, or what? But that's kind of the end of the book, and I guess I liked it. It was really gross, again, with all of the blood and with all of the dead people and things like that. But I was glad I read it. And the next book that I'm going to read is 50 Shades of Grey by E.L. James. I found it at the library and was like, okay, let's see what, all the hype was about. So anyway, that's it. And I bid you all a farewell and happy reading.